Welcome to Crossfire Conversations, the real history of gender. It's not what you've been told. June 28, 1969, just after 1 a.m. Police entered the Stonewall Inn in New York City's Greenwich Village, a routine raid by the standards of the time. Homosexuality was criminalized in many states. Cross-dressing laws were enforced. Public gathering spaces for LGBTQ individuals were frequently targeted. But that night, something shifted. Instead of dispersing quietly, patrons resisted. Coins were thrown, bottles followed, crowds gathered. For 6 nights, protests erupted in the streets. The Stonewall riots did not begin the LGBTQ movement. Activism had already been growing in the 1950s and 60s, but Stonewall became a symbol, a line in the sand. Within a year, in June 1970, the first Pride marches commemorated the uprising. Visibility became strategy. Identity became political. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This was not merely symbolic. It represented a seismic shift from pathology to legitimacy. But even within the movement, tensions emerged. Some early gay rights organizations focused narrowly on sexual orientation, wary of broader gender identity claims complicating political strategy. Transgender activists, including figures like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, argued that gender nonconforming individuals had always been on the front lines. The movement was never monolithic. It was a coalition, sometimes united, sometimes divided. In 1986, the Supreme Court ruled in Bowers v. Hardwick that states could criminalize same-sex intimacy, a devastating setback. But 17 years later, in 2003, that decision was overturned in Lawrence v. Texas. The court declared that adults had the liberty to engage in private consensual relationships without government intrusion. The constitutional argument had evolved. Equality was no longer framed as only tolerance, but as dignity. In 2015, in Obergefell v. Hodges, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that same-sex couples had a constitutional right to marry. June 26, 2015, rainbow lights illuminated the White House. For supporters, it marked the culmination of decades worth of struggle. For critics, it signaled judicial overreach. But the legal expansion did not end the debate. It transformed it. Because as sexual orientation protections solidified, attention increasingly turned towards gender identity. In 2020, the Supreme Court ruled Bostick v. Clayton County that discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity falls under Title VII's prohibition of sex discrimination, a landmark interpretation, and with it, new cultural political fault lines. Debates intensified over youth medical treatment, sports participation, access to bathrooms and locker rooms, and school curriculum. Supporters argue these protections extend the promise of civil rights, that liberty and equality must evolve alongside social understanding. Critics argue that rapid redefinition of sex-based categories raises complex questions about fairness, safety, and biological distinctions. Both sides claim the Constitution. Both sides claim compassion. And both see themselves as defending the vulnerable. What began in 1969 as resistance to police harassment has become a constitutional conversation about identity itself. The arc from Stonewall to the Supreme Court is not simply a story of victory or backlash. It is a story about categories. Law depends on definitions: male, female, marriage, sex, discrimination. But what happens when the definitions themselves are contested? Can a legal system built on fixed classifications adapt to identities that resist fixed classification? And if it cannot, what must change? The identity, the law, or our understanding of both? Civil rights movements expand who is recognized as fully human under the law. But expansion inevitably reshapes boundaries. For some, that reshaping is justice long delayed. For others, it feels like destabilization, too rapid to absorb. So here's the deeper question at the heart of this episode. When identity evolves faster than institutions can adapt, does democracy stretch? Or does it fracture? And perhaps, more importantly, can a pluralistic society hold competing moral visions without collapsing into hostility? From the streets of Greenwich Village in 1969 to the marble columns of the Supreme Court, the struggle has never been only about sexuality or gender. It has always been about power, about recognition, about who defines reality, and about whether liberty can expand without limit, or whether every expansion creates new tension. History does not give us easy answers, but it does reveal a pattern. Every generation redraws the boundary of belonging. The question is not whether change will come. The question is how we will handle it when it does. Thank you for following along on this 5-part series. As always, don't forget to like, share, and comment with any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them for you.